All right, welcome everyone to our webinar on the SAW's proposals to make changes to our community's watering rules to make them more fair, effective, and efficient. My name is Sasha Codet. I'm one of the planners in the SAW's Conservation Department, and we also have two of our other planners, Brad Weir and Sarah Gordon, who will be assisting with answering questions and with the chat. And our Vice President of Conservation, Karen Guz, is here to lead this discussion. But before I turn it over to her, I do want to ask you all to put any questions into the Q&A instead of the chat. And so the Q&A you can find by clicking on those three buttons at the bottom of your screen. And we'd also really like to hear everyone's input. And so we're asking you to take a survey on wateringrules.com, and it should pop up automatically for you at the end of the webinar. But if not, hop over to wateringrules.com. And with that, let me turn this over to Karen.
Thanks, Sasha. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in as we talk about drought and what we can do to make the drought management that we do in our community more effective in the future. Sasha, could you go to the next slide? I'm going to give you an overview of the things that I want to cover in this presentation, and then we'll have a conversation to talk about what you think. So the first thing I'm going to try to provide some context on is why drought demand management matters so much. Why is it so important that we work together as a community when we go through hot, dry periods in order to not stop landscape watering, but try to moderate how much of it we do? Second is I'm going to talk about what's working and what's not. We're a drought-prone region. We've been through this before. And as a community, we're pretty good at managing drought. But there are things that we really need to improve. And then lastly, we're going to make some proposals. Our goal is to ensure that we can get through drought periods like we've experienced the last two summers without a lot of stress as a community. We do have to moderate our water use pertaining to landscapes, but we want to avoid really onerous restrictions that we've seen in our region, especially if this drought continues into next summer. We really want to be ready and proactive. So let's go to the next slide. So this slide is very busy, but it gives you a sense of what's been happening in our region with the extraordinary weather that Texas has had both last summer and this summer. We've had extreme heat, as I know everyone listening is very aware. And at the same time, in San Antonio, we have been particularly unlucky when it comes to rain. Now, some areas around us have not gotten as much rain as they want either. And what you see in these headlines is that some places are in stage 5, some places have banned irrigation, even temporarily, and maybe have gone to every other week watering. And there have been some pretty alarming looking headlines in the region. While we want to acknowledge we're in a drought and we need to take action, we don't want to have that sense of over concern, no panic in San Antonio. We want to be prepared and ready to handle whatever Mother Nature sends our way. Let's go to the next slide. In Texas specifically, we are always in a circumstance of having to plan for the worst. And what that means is that we go through these extremes. Sometimes it rains a lot in South Central Texas, and sometimes it just doesn't rain at all like it just did. This is a quote from the Texas Water Plan. In Texas, utilities are expected to plan for the time when water supplies are at the lowest and water demands are the highest. That's a tough business to be in as a water utility. In San Antonio, it's even more urgent for us. As great as our community is and as great as the Edward Aquifer is, the plain truth of it is that we are particularly drought prone in our part of Texas. We know that we can have droughts that have gone on in the past for 7 years. We also know that the droughts that we've recently experienced, notably last summer and this summer, have been more severe than the drought of record from the 1950s. They came on fast and hard. The weather was worse than it was in the drought we historically look at from the 1950s. So as a result, out of an abundance of caution, wanting to make sure we're really ready for the future, when we do our water planning, we model a 9-year drought that could potentially occur. And we also look at the worst case conditions that we've recently experienced. We layer on that expecting more population growth. We've had a lot of people come to San Antonio because it's such a great place to live. We want to be ready for all of that. Let's go to the next slide. And specifically, a lot of what that plan hinges on is asking the question, what are we willing to do when it gets very hot and dry and our supplies are really curtailed? You may be aware, those of you listening, that now 40% of our water comes from sources other than the Edwards Aquifer, which is great, and it's been so helpful the last 2 summers. But still, 60% of the water we use as a community comes from the Edwards Aquifer, and our permit cut has been very high this year. When we go to the level of drought we're in today, the permit cut is 40%. That's a huge amount of supply to lose at a time when people perhaps want to use more water. So a key planning question is how much can we just moderate our desire to water landscapes in order to get through these hot and dry periods until rains come again? Let's go to the next slide. So this graphic, it shows you fairly recent history of a metric that's called GPCD, total gallons per capita per day. Now, what this means is it's all the water that SAWS produces for every need. That means water that goes to industrial uses, commercial uses, single family homes, both indoor and outdoor water, even the water that we unfortunately lose when our pipes break. All the water we produce in a given year divided by the entire population, currently 2.2 million people, that we serve. And this metric is useful because it gives us a sense of how much water we're using on that per capita basis. So as our population grows, we can make a good comparison year to year. I want to draw your attention to the years of about 2005 through 2011. You see an extreme volatility in that GPCD. Maybe you lived here, maybe you didn't back then. You would be able to take a pretty good guess as to which of those years were wet and which were very dry. We have a history sometimes of having our total GPCD drop tremendously when it rains and then skyrocket back up when it gets hot and dry. That's logical, but it's also a very expensive problem because that means if we can't moderate that pattern, that we have to plan for the hottest, driest day of the year on our infrastructure and our water supplies, our capacity, and our water treatment, everything. And then we know that we could have several years in a row or the very next year when we don't need it. And yet, if we make capital improvements, we have to pay for those year in, year out if we plan for the worst year and do everything to get through that year without trying to moderate the demand. So what we try to do is compromise. We plan for more demand, we plan for additional supplies, but we also try to moderate what we do when it gets so hot and dry. And that went pretty well from 2011 through last summer. And then last year, 2022, really hit us hard. And we had the biggest increase in GPCD that we have seen in 10 years. And we have a plan that we look for the future to say, how much do we think we're going to use during a drought? This last summer was 9% over the target goal in that water management plan, 9.7 billion gallons more than expected. And unfortunately, that pattern of being higher than expected has continued into 2023. If unchecked, this is going to be a costly challenge for us as our population grows, and it could lead to having to be in restrictions that no one wants. We don't want to have to go beyond once a week restrictions on irrigation use on landscape. So we've been looking at how can we avoid that. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to talk about what's working and what's not. Let's start talking about what is working. I mentioned we've been through a lot of droughts before as a community, and we do have a drought plan. It's not that we're unprepared, but it's always a good thing to analyze, is what we've been doing for many years still as effective as it can be? Well, the good news is that a lot of you out there are following the rules we've asked you to follow. We do analysis on this, and it looks like 90% of SAWS customers, both residential and commercial, are following the rules of once a week watering on their day and time. If you're one of them, thank you so much for doing that. Other good news is that when we analyze the outcomes of enforcement consequences, citations today, and if they go to a single family home, we see a big drop in usage. Single family homeowners, if they didn't catch on that they were watering more than one day a week, when they get a citation, we see a really big drop in consumption. So we don't like citations, but they do work with residential customers. The other good news is that we know it makes a big difference when demand drops. So specifically, the rules state that people use their sprinkler or irrigation systems Monday through Friday, not on Saturday and Sunday. We see a drop of 40 to 50 million gallons a day in the overall production from the SAW system on Saturday and Sunday when people turn off the irrigation like they're supposed to. Now, very exciting this time of year is that we tend to see the aquifer even bump back up a little bit on weekends. So if you're really attuned and you watch the aquifer levels and you pay attention on weekends, you'll see that, oh, it went up Saturday, Sunday. That's interesting, even absent rain. So the message in that is that when we all work together, it makes a big difference in the aggregate and how much water we use as a community, and it makes a big difference for aquifer levels. Now, we've got some challenges though. We've analyzed what's going on, and we've got some things that need adjustment. One of the things that needs to be adjusted is that we have places that SAW serves where the municipal citation, that's the consequence for not following the rules, can't be given. Specifically, if someone lives in a separately incorporated city that SAW serves, a municipal city of San Antonio citation can't be given there. And while a lot of people who live in these separately incorporated cities are still following the rules, they are not all, and we see some very high usage in those separately incorporated cities. We are also not seeing the responsiveness from those commercial customers who are not following the rules. We're not seeing savings after they get either a warning or a citation. It appears, too, that some of the customers who are repeat violators are not influenced by citations. Both of these things are new. When we've had prior severe droughts, like back in 2011, this was not true. We would see a drop in commercial use, and we saw repeat violators stop it. So something is happening, and one of the things we've noticed is that it appears the citation cost is a problem. The cost of a municipal citation has not changed in 20 years, and we're hearing through the grapevine that people are not finding that relatively low cost enough to influence them, particularly large commercial properties that may pay thousands of dollars for their irrigation bill. That relatively modest cost of the citation they're getting doesn't seem to be enough to change what they're doing. And then lastly, a big problem we're seeing is poor workmanship in new irrigation systems at single family homes. And this is important because those irrigation systems, when they're not designed to the very good standards we have in Texas, will permanently use 20% more whenever they're run. We can't afford that water anytime, but most importantly, we can't afford it during a drought. So we need to do better at the irrigation systems that are put in. Let's go to the next slide. I want to just go over some data on what we've looked at about who used the water. Our water use, I mentioned, went up last summer a lot. And so we analyzed, where did that water go? Well, a lot of the increase went to our customers. Yes, we had more main breaks, and we lost more water to main breaks as the ground shifted because it was so dry. We've had a record number of main breaks. But more of the increase went to billed water. And we analyzed that and could see a lot of it went to residential, and then another big chunk of it went to commercial irrigation. There's a disproportionate amount of the water that's used by top using customers. Specifically, last summer, the top 6% of users, those who use more than almost 95% of other households, used 21% of the water in 2022. In contrast, we had a lot of customers, 52% who kept their water use relatively low, and they only used 23% of the water last year. Now to put it in perspective. If the top 5% users at residential could find it possible to cut back just 10% of their use, we would save 88 million gallons a month. That's how much of an influence there is for those top users. And we're very much trying to message that to them. Improved compliance among the top 10% is part of this. Some of the top users are compliant, they just have really big irrigation systems, and we still need them to find a way to cut back. Other people in that top 5% are not following the rules, and we need them to start. Let's go to the next slide. So here's the questions we ask ourselves about how to address these things. The first big question is, how do we ensure that all SAWS customers are equally subject to the same rules, regardless of where they live? It should be true that everybody follows the same rules if you're a SAWS customer. We all have the same benefits of the SAWS system, of the conservation rebates and incentives that are available, so we all should share the challenge during drought. Secondly, we want to increase our savings from once a week watering, and we want to do that while we minimize the impact on the majority of people out there who are already being frugal and doing what we ask them to do. That's a big challenge that we take very seriously. Third, how do we influence those customers who are not appearing to respond to citations, notably large irrigation sites that don't seem influenced by the citation process? And then lastly, we have these new irrigation systems that are not all they should be. They are not up to all of the very good standards in state statute for irrigation in Texas. We have actually some of the most rigorous irrigation standards in the United States. We just want them all followed. So I'm going to talk about that. There are some other kind of loopholes we're going to talk about too that we need to close in the rules to make sure we're saving as much as we can with once a week watering. Let's go to the next slide. So there's a key change in how we look at enforcement that we think needs to take place. We have historically relied on municipal ordinance to set the rules and have a compliance consequence through the City of San Antonio citation process. But that's not what everybody does anymore. We're not alone in this challenge of serving customers who are either outside the extraterritorial jurisdiction or in a separately incorporated city. So what other utilities have done is used a very different model to clarify who has to follow the rules and what the consequences are. Let's go to the next slide and I'll explain that. An alternative way to do it is to say, it's just a rule of being a SAWS customer. And you do that through what are called utility service regulations. Utilities like SAWS are authorized to have rules for customers so that we can be reliable and cost effective while providing the critical service of water and sewer service to our community. We have rules, of course, today. Most of them right now pertain to development of new parts of our system and also to things like backflow, which is a safety issue with our system. But what we're looking at is adding to the utility service regulation clarity that all SAWS customers need to follow the drought rules regardless of where they live. This is something that our near neighbors have already done, notably Austin, Georgetown, and New Braunfels have all made it clear that all of their customers, regardless of where they live, must follow the drought rules. So we're working on drafting that, and we think that will solve some of the challenges that we are seeing. But there's a next step too. Let's go to the next slide. So the first step I mentioned is the utility service regulation change. That is something the SAWS board can adopt. But it doesn't help unless we have a consequence for not following the rules. So the second step that other utilities have taken is to set up a fee structure, something that goes on the water bill. And that would be something the city of San Antonio would have to approve. So SAWS is working with a rate fee expert that is already very familiar with the SAWS systems and all the best practices pertaining to coming up with fair and reasonable and effective fees to come up with a new fee structure so that instead of someone being caught violating and getting a citation, there would be a fee associated with it. So on the right of this slide, you see what would change and what wouldn't. Well, already today, the city ordinance directs SAWS to do education, enforcement, and monitoring. SAWS already documents very carefully when there are violations with photographs and detailed notes by trained personnel. Citations are never given on hearsay. SAWS would also continue to communicate with customers who appear to have a violation. What would change is that right now, if someone has disagrees with the violation notice that they get, right now their most clear path to resolving it is to go to municipal court. That's kind of a lot, frankly. And we would like to have a simpler path that eliminates the criminal process. Some people are very upset that it's a criminal citation, like a traffic ticket, and that they have to go to municipal court if they want to dispute it. So we think we could be quicker about potential disputes regarding violations, more efficient, and still very fair with the dispute resolution process directly with SAWS instead of through the courts. Let's go to the next slide. So what are the advantages of this new model? Well, a key one is getting away from the criminal process. It's very time consuming. SAWS currently has to do a lot of processing of all of the records for potential violations in notarized affidavits that go down to the municipal courts. Then the municipal courts have to spend a lot of time processing them. And as I mentioned, if customers want to dispute, they go down to municipal court, which is a lot. So we've had a lot of citations this year, up to 7,000, more than 7,000 in fact, and they've all had to go through this process. And we think we could avoid that. Second advantage is, of course, that a utility service regulation model would apply equally to all SAWS customers, even if they live in a separately incorporated city or happen to live outside that 5-mile radius from the city that's called the extraterritorial jurisdiction. It would no longer matter. There would be no more analysis of, can this customer get a consequence? The answer would be everyone can. Other improvements we can make is to have a logical fee structure associated with violations. Right now, it's complicated. The courts are doing their best to work with us, but all violations, even if they're first, second, third, fourth violations, all cost the same amount of money, an amount that hasn't changed in 20 years. So we can have a logical fee structure instead that for this new system that would make it very clear. Your first, second, third, fourth violation will escalate in cost and hopefully would really discourage repeat violations. Another thing we've seen other utilities do is have the cost of the violation reflect the level of drought. We're in a really severe drought. The Edwards aquifer levels have been very low, historically low. And there's a big difference between being in Edwards aquifer stage 4 versus stage 1. So if we were to say, look, it's really urgent when the aquifer is at this historic low level, this is why it's going to cost more if you violate. Please don't. That would help us with the messaging in the community, send a sense of urgency. The other logical change we've seen other utilities do with this model is to adjust the fee so that if you're a very large commercial user who maybe pays thousands of dollars for your irrigation landscape bill every month, your fee is larger. So it would get your attention and it wouldn't be seen as, doesn't matter, it's not a very large charge. And then finally, I mentioned we can simplify dispute resolution. We can even have, for single family first violations, we can even have an education class online to get the first fee waived for single family customers. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I mentioned that we have a challenge with specifically very high users, either commercial or residential. And we've gone into a pretty deep drought this year, and we've remained in City of San Antonio stage 2 once a week watering. Well, there's some reasons. The current stage 3 rules that are in the city ordinance go to every other week watering for everyone. That's a really rough rule to impose on people who are already following the rules and already keeping their water use low. It impacts everybody. So we're reluctant to go to that every other week watering because we know it would be very difficult, particularly for people who don't have an automatic irrigation system. So we have a proposed different stage 3. and that would be an excess use surcharge aimed at the top users. It would be one number that we have yet to determine, but on a lot of months, it takes about 18,000 gallons to use more than 95% of the other customers. So we'll have to do some analysis to see if that's the number for, you keep normal charges, or if you would go above that, now you have extra charges. But that's what we're looking at, is kind of finding one number that we apply anytime we're in stage 3 to say, we really need you to stay under this number. And if you go over it, you'll have extra charges that will be expensive and hopefully discourage that very high usage. Let's go to the next slide. I've mentioned dispute resolution. It's really critical to be fair that if we say we think you violated the rules, even if we have a picture and we have trained staff, there can be an error. I'll give you an example. Property lines can be very odd. And if there's a house and directly next to it is an irrigation going off, it's usually true that right next to the house, that's that house's irrigation. Occasionally, though, property lines are really odd, and the property line for the adjacent house goes right up to their neighbor's house. So a few times we've had someone come back to us and say, I think you made a mistake. I don't think that was my irrigation system. Let's check the property lines. And if we find an administrative error like that, we are more than happy to get rid of the citation and not process it. But right now, people often don't realize that if they're quick before it goes to court, they could contact us and they go all the way to court to deal with that. And we don't want it. We would rather have it be possible for people to come straight to SAW staff with something like that and we can settle it quickly. Now, let's say, though, that it's a different level of dispute and there's a disagreement. SAW staff says, no, we're pretty sure this was your house and your irrigation. You disagree. We will still have to have a committee that people can have review it separate from the staff level to determine if there should be some different outcome. But we think we can be quicker. The process today is months long for single family and up to a year to go through court with commercial. That is because the courts are very busy. We think we could be more efficient with a dispute resolution handled by SAWs. Let's go to the next slide. I have mentioned that irrigation systems that are going into new homes in particular are not always all they should be. We see a lot of problems with the design and workmanship of some of these irrigation systems that will cause them to use a lot more water forever. They're very hard to correct on the back end. And Texas has great standards, but we just need to make sure that they are rigorously followed every time a new system is added to our community. So we are talking to the city of San Antonio. The city of San Antonio has a permit process and an inspection process today. We want to ramp it up and have SAWS take responsibility for working with the city to ramp up that inspection to be more rigorous than it is today. And improved irrigation efficiency and workmanship has been shown to save water, and it's a boon to the people who are buying that home who deserve to have one that follows all of the rules. So we're working on that with the city of San Antonio right now to make sure that that inspection process becomes even more rigorous than it is today. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this topic, drip irrigation, is probably the hardest one for us to talk to people about. Drip irrigation is a product that applies water through a drip emitter from tubing close to the ground instead of spraying it in the air and having it fall to the ground and then absorb into the soil. And there are some real advantages to drip, reducing evaporative losses, and the drip system can be customized to the landscape. However, there seem to be some misconceptions about drip out there. Notably, I have on the right some data from the manufacturers that shows that pop-up spray and rotor spray, the ones that go back and forth, that's their rate of application in inches per hour. The most commonly sold drip irrigation, either 12-inch spray drip or 18 at 0.9 gallon per hour emitters, applies water at almost exactly the same rate as spray. And yet, people run this drip much more, wasting water. We also see drip having a lot of problems with maintenance, but that's a different issue. The issue we're trying to overcome is that currently in today's rules, for no reason we can understand, it's been true for 20 years that drip is pretty much exempt. People can run drip every day during stage 2, 8 hours a day. And some properties that have drip are running it every day, and it uses as much water as spray. So this is a problem. We don't have the water to spare to allow that loophole for drip anymore. We need to change it. Let's go to the next slide. So what can we do? We can close that loophole, and we can acknowledge that drip irrigation should run on the same schedule as spray. This is a picture of some medians in San Antonio that put drip under the grass in full sun, and the grass is green this summer because they're able to run it 3 days a week per the rules we have on the books today. There's not a reason for that. The water use is still extraordinarily high for these medians. And so we really need to adjust that. For perspective, these medians, they are 17 miles of medians, use as much water as a community hospital. So you might be shocked at how much water a drip irrigation system can use when it's run multiple times a week, even if it's well maintained like this one is. We will need some variances if we change this rule because drip does water sometimes at a slower rate than some spray. And so very large properties may need to water more than 1 day a week to water everything just once. We also will have to talk about trees and tough new trees that are put in parking lot islands and make sure they get the start in life that they need to survive because they are very important to our community. And finally, some people have a modest vegetable garden at their home that they put drip in. It is best for vegetable gardens, and so we can work that out. You can still have a vegetable garden. But by and large, what we're trying to avoid is situations like this picture, where it's keeping grass green more than other grass in the community because of this odd loophole we just need to change in the rules. Let's go to the next slide. So does this proposal I have made address the questions that have been asked? The first one was, one of the questions was, can we make everybody subject to the rules equally? And yes, we think so. With the utility service regulation and the fee on the bill, we'll all be on the same page. Secondly, can we make sure these new things we're proposing don't impact those who are already following the rules, and specifically among those people whose water usage is reasonable? So if you're using under 18,000 gallons at your home and you're following the rules, nothing about this will impact you at all. If you are following the rules and a very high user, we will be talking to you about that stage 3 surcharge and trying to help you make a cut like we're asking people to do. That stage 3 surcharge proposal would not impact at least 90% of the customers at the levels we're looking at setting that one number at for applying the surcharge. And then finally, the new mechanism, the fee structure that we're going to analyze and put forward for everybody to review in a few months should be effective at influencing both repeat violators and large commercial users. And I've mentioned that drip loophole, that'll save us quite a bit more water. We're seeing more and more drip going in and people eager to use it, frankly, to get around the rules. And so it's important that we get the extra savings from closing that loophole as well. Let's go to the next slide. So what do we do next? We have made this proposal to the SAWS Board of Trustees. We're talking in the community. We're going to be talking to elected officials and asking people what they think. Sasha mentioned on watering.com, you can go there and take a survey, and we want to know what people think. We're going to come back with more specifics. I've mentioned edits to utility service regulations. We also have to edit the city ordinance. We're working on that right now. We hope no later than December 1. We will have those draft regulations out for people to be able to read on watering.com. And then the fee proposal may take a little longer because we're working with an expert to make sure that it's following all best practices. We're looking to have that available for review no later than January 1. Please make sure you keep an eye on that wateringrules.com website and our Garden Style SA e-newsletter because we'll be trying to put forward updates on this. If you've got folks in the community who you'd like us to come and talk to, let us know. We would love to come to your neighborhood or your organization to talk to you more about this to keep getting feedback. Ultimately, our goal is to be ready for next summer. It is raining today and we couldn't be more delighted. But to be honest with you, we're more than 10 inches below normal year to date on rain, and it's going to take a lot to pull us out of this drought. And we could go right back into it next summer. So we really want to be ready before next summer with modified rules that will be more effective, fair, and efficient. So Sasha mentioned that you look on the bottom of your screen and you're looking for the circle that has 3 dots. So if you see that circle with 3 dots and you click on that, that's your opportunity to put a question into the Q&A, and then we're going to talk about the questions that you have. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and we'll close the presentation, and Sasha's going to let me know maybe if people have already asked some questions.
Yeah, so it looks like we've gotten a few questions in already.
Great.
So off the bat, we've got a question of how much would the fee be for violations? I know you had mentioned hiring a rate consultant.
Yeah, so I'm sorry I don't have a number yet because it would be premature until we analyze it. So what we're looking for is a smaller number for single family first time violators and a larger number if you're a very high user. And so I don't have specifics yet, but that's the spirit of what we're trying to do. We're also looking for whatever the number is. Right now it's $137 for a citation for anybody, no matter how many times you violate and no matter how big a water user you are. But, and it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't go up with stages of drought or with repeat violations. So whatever the numbers are, we're looking at them going up with repeat violations as well. So I'm sorry I don't have specifics yet because there's a lot that goes into setting a fair and effective fee. SAWS can't just come up with a number and call it good. We have to have analysis behind it, and then we need to get input.
Fantastic, thank you. So a follow-up to that, what is the money from the current violation amounts? What does that go towards?
Mm.
And what would the money from the fees go to if it moved to fee on the bill?
Great questions. Right now, the courts take in the money. If you pay for a citation, they go to the City of San Antonio Municipal Court. I'm not an expert on what happens with them behind the scenes, but it is my understanding that they have to turn a portion of that over to the state and that they're just looking to recover the costs of running the whole process in the court system. And they may not be fully with it not having changed in so many years. So SAWS gets none of the money today. If we do a fee structure, one of the things we're analyzing is what our actual costs are during drought, and they are substantial. And it's, you know, we spend a lot on enforcement, on staff being out all night, doing patrol, all the paperwork associated with it. Also, the increased production that we have on our system is surprisingly expensive. There's a lot of energy, power, chemical costs associated with the very high usage levels that we have seen this year. So we're analyzing those actual costs we can document as well as risks that we're trying to avoid to our community and making sure that the fees would reflect those. Promise you nobody's going to get rich at SAWS from this. We would look to recover costs of dealing with drought with those fees.
Fantastic, thank you. So kind of still on the topic of money, but rotating over towards the surcharge. So what about people who have a pool and need to, let's say, fill that pool during stage 3? How would that affect them?
Well, first, let me talk about pools a little bit. And I want to have full disclosure. I have a pool in my backyard, and it does increase my monthly water consumption by between 1,000 and 2,000 gallons a month, depending on just how hot and dry it is and how little rain we have. For perspective, if I were to run an irrigation system at my home, it would use 2,000 to 3,000 gallons every time it ran. So while a pool does increase your monthly consumption, does not as much as running your irrigation system. Now, if I were to drain my pool because it needed maintenance and have to refill it, that would be over 20,000 gallons, and I would be expected to pay every charge associated with that, including the tiered rates that SAWS has that get higher as my usage is higher. There is no discount for filling a pool. So we would hope that people would try to avoid doing pool maintenance during a severe drought. Sometimes it can't be avoided. And we'd have to talk about what would happen to the surcharge level if someone had unavoidable maintenance with the pool or had to fill it. But broadly, the policy at SAWS is a pool is a discretionary item that we choose to have at our home that very few people are lucky enough to have. And so the charges are what they are usually on taking care of the pool or filling it.
Fantastic, thank you. So on the topic of the drip changes in the rules, will the drip irrigation system change apply to all stages of drought?
It is our intent the rules would be the same for drip as it is for spray. I've mentioned the application rate is the same. And the fundamental thing I pointed out is that right now the rules stage 1 and 2, and then continuing on, allow people to frankly use more water for their plants because they have drip than people who don't have it. And I can't justify that as a person looking at what's going on. It doesn't make sense that we would allocate more water to a property that has drip than a property that has spray. If we make the rules the same, that seems inherently more fair, and it does save more water to help us keep out of those deeper restrictions. So yes, we're talking about making it equal in all stages.
Okay,
We
thank
do
you.
have a question that came in. Has anyone thought of proposing commercial and residential rebates for rainwater capture and irrigation?
Well, interesting question because we have various rebates today. If you're a residential customer and you want something as modest as a rain barrel, we encourage you to look at our Water Saver Rewards program. You get points for getting educated, and then you can take those points and redeem them for plants, for mulch, and even for a rain barrel. And then on a commercial property, or if you're really ambitious on your single family wanting a really big, expensive cistern, we have rebates for those as well. Now, I'm going to caution everybody that on-site reclaim, whether it's putting your condensate water in there at a commercial property or cooling tower blowdown or nuisance water, in addition to rainwater, it's pretty expensive. It's about $2 a gallon on storage. And in the summers we've had, usually if you're trying to run an irrigation system, your cistern would be dry by the time we got to midsummer. So we try to educate people about these options to make sure they're realistic, that they understand that on-site reclaim, no matter what the source is usually not a great, I get to water as much as I need to or want to solution. So we have the incentives, but we try to bake in education to make sure that the outcome is everything it can be.
Thank you very much. So bouncing back over to the changes to the drip rules, can the drip irrigation rules be enforced without the smart Connect H2O AMI meters since watering can't be viewed on an hourly basis?
Well, drip irrigation is actually not as mysterious as people think it is. It's not as obvious as spray. You know, driving by and when spray is going off, it's really visually obvious. But if you see a property that's clearly irrigated and you don't see spray heads, yeah, that's probably drip. And if we are going by a property where it's running, you can hear it. And even on a traditional meter, if you stop and look, you can see that meter spinning on the property when the irrigation is going off. So there, you know, the rules are you can water 7 to 11 on drip, and a few people have gotten citations for running drip at different hours than that and more than that, even at the current rules where they can do that daily. So it's not impossible to enforce. And one of the things that's interesting about the electronic meter data is that people are surprised that they see that the consumption from running their drip is as high as running their spray, that they're surprised by that. They didn't previously necessarily understand that when they look at running that drip irrigation, it really is a good teachable moment to be able to see, oh, wow, that's a lot of use that I can see on that graphic from the hourly use. So we're excited about the Connect H2O electronic meters that in the next 4 years everyone will have, because that will help everybody really understand their usage and manage it better.
Fantastic, thank you. And we get this question quite a bit. Is there any intent to discuss the watering hours, and why are the watering hours 7 to 11?
That is a question we get a lot, so happy to talk about it. We used to have different watering hours during stage 2, still 8 hours, but they were different. They were something like they started at 3 in the morning till 8 in the morning, and then there was an evening period. And we had a lot of complaints about those watering hours at the time for various reasons. You know, some people have automatic irrigation and other people use a hose end sprinkler that they drag around the yard and relocate. And so for people who were using hose end sprinklers, they really hated that most of those hours were in the dark. And even people with sprinkler systems complained that they couldn't see and they didn't know they had a problem with the operation of the system until they got a huge bill. So with much debate, lots of community input, staff had proposed 6 to 10. We had some stakeholders who really wanted 7 to 11 at the time, really pushed for it. And, you know, they prevailed and it ended up being 7 to 11, 7 to 11, which is easy to remember. But we find it frustrates people who are really concerned about how hot it is from 10 to 11 in the morning. And you know, that's probably true. It is hotter, but we couldn't show at the time that it was such a huge difference to justify saying no to the hours that were being requested by people who showed up to all the meetings. Now, fast forward to today, we're getting more input, and we have a new situation with our energy grid across the state. The folks at ERCOT are telling us that it's particularly challenging to use a lot of energy in the early evening, like 7 to 9 p.m., and that our grid is tested during hot weather. Well, the interesting connection between energy and water is that when people use a lot of water, SAWS has to turn on high service pumps to fill the tanks to keep the system pressurized. So there is a conversation going to analyze how much it might help the energy grid if our hours changed, if we didn't have the watering hours include 7 to 9 p.m. I don't know the outcome of that yet. We're having conversations with folks to analyze it and discuss if that's something we should really strongly consider. If we did, a logical solution might be 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. in the morning, avoiding that 10 to 11 time that's irritating people, and then maybe 9 p.m. to midnight. I will say I don't believe there's any one watering window that's going to please everyone, and we do need one to make it easy to understand and easy to enforce. So happy to take your input on that watering.com survey. Let us know what you think, and we'll take that into consideration.
Awesome. So certainly I know communication is a huge part of what we do during drought. One person has asked, how often do we communicate with the media, like news stations, about restrictions, and what kind of things are we doing to help clarify the restrictions and let people know what they should be doing?
Oh, thanks for asking that because it gives me a chance to talk about it. We have a big campaign right now, Wrangle Your Water Use, and it is on radio, on digital billboards. It's an email blast going out to a lot of people. We've had people say, oh my goodness, I can't avoid this. It's popping up everywhere. And that's what we want to hear because we've been for the last 2 summers really pushing, trying to make sure people know the rules and know the urgency of it. Our local media have been great about helping us by doing news stories on it on TV and radio that are just them covering it as a news item. We've also paid for commercials on TV and radio and print and billboards and Spotify and cable TV and every social media everywhere we can. The conservation department, if we have your email, you have gotten an email from us multiple times trying to make sure you know what your watering day and time is. So it's an interesting world we live in today, though, and that people don't get their news all the same way. And so there's no one thing we can do. We have to use everything from social media to email to all of those things I mentioned, and hope that we are effective at helping people hear this important news.
And likewise, if we make any changes, if these things get pushed through and approved, what specifically are some of the things that we might expect to do to announce this information and these changes?
Well, we're talking to a lot of people right now. So we're keeping a spreadsheet of all the organizations that we've spoken with and everybody we will continue speaking with. So if we're successful at getting these rules through, we'll circle back to all those folks. And then there would also be, you know, the main change would be if you're in a separately incorporated city, we would really make sure those folks who live in those cities know, hey, you're subject to the same rules as everybody. So just be aware. The fundamental rule of watering 1 day a week on a specific day based on your address and during a specific time, that we're trying to keep the same. And so if we change the times, that's going to be a challenge to tell everybody that the times change. So we'll see if that does change, and that will be a really rigorous messaging to really encourage everybody to change their times for applying water, and really warning people for a while to make sure it sinks in. But the outreach we're doing today is going to help us, assuming we're successful at getting these improvements going before next summer.
So with today's specific outreach, this webinar, if someone was not able to attend today, is there somewhere that they could go and watch this presentation?
Yes, if you go to watering.com, we have a presentation that I gave to the SAWS board a few months ago, but this one is being recorded and we're going to place that on watering.com so people can watch it at their leisure. If it updates again, we'll do the same thing and replace the video with a more updated presentation with more information. As I've mentioned, as we have more updates, that's the place to go when we have the draft of the ordinance change and utility service regulations. Those will go on there, as will when the fee structure goes in place. We also have citizen committees, a community conservation committee and a citizens experience committee that we're going to be taught. We've already been talking with them about this. We'll be talking to them more. There will be more updates to the SAWS Board of Trustees. Those are available on saws.org. Those are always open to the public and recorded. So lots of opportunities to get updates from SAWS and to hear what's still going on.
Fantastic, thank you.
And just wanted to let you know, it's wateringrules.com.
Did I say it wrong? Thank you for correcting me if I said it wrong, Brad.
You've said it right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for making sure people got that, because it's a useful specialty site for people to get a chance to see things, answer a few questions, let us know what you think, and then look for updates.
Absolutely. I am not seeing any additional questions in the chat or the Q&A. Sasha or Brad, did y'all receive any further questions from customers? No? Okay, well, I think those are all of the things that we have today. Karen, do you have anything further that you would like to add?
No, I just want to thank everybody again for listening, and again reiterate that if you're one of those 90% of people who's already been following the rules, thank you very much. We really are looking to try to not have to go further than once a week watering unless it becomes a true emergency. And we think that these changes we're proposing are going to help us do that, to have predictable, understandable, fair rules that work as we move forward.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen, Sarah, and Brad, and everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.